Thank you. Welcome, debaters, to the grand finals of the Middle School League of Korea Youth League Championship 2018. My name is Kim. I'll be chairing the round. We have all these panels that would take too much to name one each, right? So apologies. But congratulations on Team Sunshine and Rainbow and Bunnies on advancing so far. Let's have a nice debate. One note to audiences, please do not leave the room or enter the room while the speech is going on. Okay, if you're gonna do it, 움직이실 거면은 스피치 끝나고 다른 스피치가 시작하기 전에 움직여주시기 바랍니다. And please don't disturb. Okay. Right. Then, without further ado, on the motion that assuming feasibility, this House prefers a world with only one language that everyone can use, I would like to call upon the Prime Minister. Yes, you may.
So first, before going into our consensual arguments, let me first clarify one thing. Because we're debating under the motion that we're assuming this kind of feasibility, let's assume that everybody knows this language, everybody knows how to use and how to speak with this language, Mr. Speaker. Let's make that clear and go into today's debate. So first of all, let's talk about the problem that is going to exist when we have a lot of languages right now in the status quo. First of all, we think that there's a problem, a lack of communication between the people because there are so many languages that exist right now in the status quo. We think that it's hard for these individuals to actually express their own ideas to other people, and interaction between those people are right now limited because they have different languages. That's why we think that diverse problem happens. Because of this, is I'm going to further explain to you my first argument. So we think that when we have a lot of diverse problems happening, because we have diverse languages, we think that by having one language, that solves the problem. So at the end of the day, our team would like to go for a goal where we have a better free market ideas, but we also have a free deep discourse between those people. So having said that, I will move on to our first argument. Let's talk about what kind of problems are happening and how we can actually solve this. First analysis. Let's talk about what kind of real specific problems are happening right now in the status quo. First of all, Mr. Madam Speaker, we believe the conflicts because a lot of different languages happen in our society. So we think that because of the different languages itself, when these people cannot interact with them efficiently, when these people cannot express their own ideas to the other person because the other person can't simply understand them, we think that becomes a conflict between those kind of two peoples. For example, in the status quo, you can already see problems like sectarian divides when these two entities, these two groups in that specific country have different languages, as Mr. Madam Speaker, and they can't interact with one another. With that also leads to another conflict in those situations, Mr. Speaker. So we think that this is a significant harm, and this is an unnecessary harm, unnecessary conflict that we, the government, can not make sure that these kind of conflicts do not happen under our side because only one language is going to be used globally. But second of all, we also recognize the problem of monopolization of certain languages, Mr. Speaker. You can already see that, for example, English or Chinese, these kind of certain languages are monopolizing our whole society. But the further problem that occurs from this is that because certain languages or few languages are monopolized by these kind of few countries, first of all, other languages disappear in small countries. But second of all, we think that the influence of other countries differ from country to country because there's how much these languages, certain languages used differs from other countries. So for example, if these English or Chinese are used in the global world, Mr. Madam Speaker, we get the influence that the US or China can give that in the countries like Africa, like Ethiopia or whatnot are hugely different in our global society because a lot of people use those languages in the first place, therefore they can actually interact with a lot of people in our society. But third of all, we think that a lot of languages disappears in other small countries. So in these situations, we think that small countries, their own part of the culture is going to disappear under their case because they have so many diverse languages coming from their society. So that's why we think that this is an important thing, unnecessary harm that we, the government, wants to prevent in today's debate by having only one language and not being able to let these small countries lose part of their own culture. The second analysis to talk about how we can actually solve this problem by having one language, Mr. Madam Speaker. First of all, as I already told you, we believe that we're now going to be able to stop unnecessary conflicts from happening in the first place. Because these people only speak one language, they can easily interact with each other. They have no limits in the first place. Therefore, we think that gives their benefit when there's no conflict at all. We think that these three problems that I already told you before are going to be solved by having those kind of one language. Therefore, we think that when these same languages have in our global society, no such extreme situations are going to happen under our keys. Then second argument, let's talk about the practical benefits, but before moving on, yes, about this.
When we have like a technology such as translation.
Yes,
and stuff.
exactly. The technology itself that actually changes the language to your language itself proves that you need one language because it is unnecessary to have different languages because interaction does not happen. That technology itself proves to us, Mr. and Madam Speaker, that interaction is important, that you need one kind of language to interact well with that another person, to understand the other person, what they actually want to express. So thank you. So then the second argument, let's talk about the practical benefits. First of all, we think that there's going to be a free market of ideas. How? Mr. Madam Speaker, when there is one language in our society, and when these people can now understand each other better, and they can actually interact with each other better, we think the barrier and the limitations itself disappears under our society. Therefore, we think that cultural ideologies or controversy or any such social discourse can easily happen under our side over other contexts, over other countries, because they use the same language, because now they have no such limitations to do those kinds of things, and there's no such unnecessary conflicts. Therefore, at the end of the day, we think that we're going to have more healthy discourse over the global society because now people can so much easily interact with each other, right? Therefore, we think that the diverse perceptions of everybody who now are able to express their own ideas, their own diverse thoughts, are easily able to do that when they can't actually do that under their side because they can't simply interact with each other people. It's so hard to do that, and there are certain limitations, Mr. Madam Speaker. So as they say, if this technology does not exist, if this technology is not reached out to some parts of the country, then those people are not able to interact with other people because that technology itself is not spread towards those people in the first place, right? So therefore, we think that they have certain harm in their society. That is why we think that when in these kinds of only in those kinds of nations, this debate happened. Now we have a debate where globally everybody can participate because everybody uses the same language. It doesn't necessarily have to be every technology going through all of these places, which takes a long time, but it's more harmful and has a lot of limitations. So for these reasons, Madam Speaker, if you really want unnecessary conflicts happening in our society, we believe that we should take this debate on therefore very helpful purpose.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to call upon the next speaker, Leader of Opposition.
Mr. Non-speaker, we think that language changed throughout the time, right? Throughout the history, so that people can pronounce it in the most efficient way and use it in the most efficient way, right? But the status quo language that is used by the people in the status quo is the best language that these people can use because that is approved in that society, and that is the most efficient way to pronounce it, and that's the most easiest way to pronounce it, Mr. Non-speaker. So if we follow their size policy and their size motion, we think that they can just neglect all the history based on these language. It will be all neglected by society, and my identity that's based on my country will be neglected, Mr. Non-speaker. Before moving on to our team's two arguments, let me rebut what the government team has stated. So first, they talked about the lack of communication to express their ideas to other people in foreign countries, right? We have 2 point rebuttals. Firstly, we think that is not exclusive in the first place because there is trade between countries going on, and there are political events of representatives of countries come to meet in the political events, and there is happening in the South Pole efficiently, right? We think that there's no reason why the government is actually like doing these things, even though they like destroy the identity of each people and just like do, even if there is an alternative in the South Pole, Mr. Speaker. And secondly, the second rebuttal is that we think that the learning process itself is beneficial itself, because like learning the other language itself by that is to, we think that it can understand the culture and interaction will happen even in our case, Mr. Speaker. And they also talked about how it can degrade culture, right? We think that this is no. We think that the government are the ones who degrade culture, Mr. Speaker, because they're the ones who neglect my identity, my language that I've been used for 1,000 years, and neglecting my own history and my own language, Mr. Speaker. And they also talked about how it can solve for problems and how it is unnecessary. How it can like reduce the unnecessary conflict and limits, right? But we already told you that it isn't exclusive in their case, Mr. Speaker. And even though they have the alternative to do in the South Pole, they're not actually trying to use those alternatives, Mr. Speaker. Moving on to our team's two arguments. Our team's first argument is how we will neglect the culture of the countries and how we will neglect the identity of the countries. Moving on, we have 3-point analysis. First, analysis about the South Pole, what's happening in the South Pole, and secondly, what happens when there is one language. And thirdly, we're going to explain why making a new language is neglecting the culture of these people. Moving on to our first analysis, which is about what is happening in the South Pole. We think that diversity is the most important value when it comes to language. So what is being good in the South Pole is that we accept diverse identity and we respect identity, own identity in the South Pole, Mr. Speaker. And second analysis, what happens when there is one language? We think that the consequence is that. So before moving on to any other things, what is language, Mr. Speaker? We think that there is two point of using language. Firstly, language is my identity to represent my own country, my religion, my ideas and thoughts. So it should be different by countries because language itself is special and unique, and it's totally different by countries. So therefore, we think that it is different by how I represent myself is different in the first place. So it should be different It should vary by countries, Mr. Speaker. Moving on to second definition of language, we think that language comes before culture, and language is the base of the culture, Mr. Speaker. It portrays ideas and how people share ideas, Mr. Speaker. So each country has different culture, and therefore we think that social atmosphere, environment is different by cultures. Therefore, we think the language should be also different by countries, Mr. Speaker. Moving on to a third analysis, which is about why making a new language is neglecting the culture. Firstly, we think that we think that there is two reasons why making a new language is neglecting our own cultures. Firstly, we think that if we follow the government team's policy and the motion, we think that it will go to one line of culture, right? Even if there is a different cultural and different history based on different history, Mr. Speaker, they're just claiming that we should go to one line of culture and neglect all the history and language of these countries, right? The second harm about making a new language is about neglecting the culture is that we think that the history is the most important thing, and the history comes to the most important thing that you should know as a person living in that certain country, right? So we think that the most important way to remember these terms or history is the language itself. So, but we think that when the words can actually link to the history is different by countries, and it varies by countries. But when we follow their policy, we think that it is making the history as one line of history, and making actually no link between the history and the words that is used by certain countries. Moving on to the second argument, which is about how it will be difficult to understand for people, and how it will be country words or different accents and different words after using their policy, right? But moving on to our first analysis, we think that even if we make same and equal language for the countries, we think that it can vary by areas, right? But for example, the language. Even though language is same in Jeju and Seoul, we think that there is a certain accent and different words used in a certain country, right? So therefore, we think it will make people difficult to understand, right? So therefore, we think that it will make people to actually understand the different accent, different words in a hard way, right? Therefore, I'm proud to oppose. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. Now I'd like to move on to the next speaker. Can the Deputy Prime Minister come to the speech?
Mr. Madam Speaker, we told you from the beginning of our speech, we told you that because of limitations and barrier for the communications, there are diverse conflicts happening within our society. But the opposition team today in this debate are neglecting that problems and saying that diversity is important, and they're saying that history will be won with that within our society. Let me prove you why this is not the case. First of all, they told you how they rebutted to our Prime Minister saying that this kind of because of the trade happening within our society, this is not mutually exclusive. We tell you, when we are trading with other politicians, like other countries' politicians, we need this kind of people or alternative, which they said, which was about the translation in the first place. We say that this is the main problem, while people have limitations within this kind of within the other people without that translation in the beginning. We say that this itself proves you that why we need one language for better communications, which was their alternative translations. They never told you why translator is more efficient than our policy and why is it necessary when we already told you that the translation itself is the main basis that proves you that our policy is very necessary and this kind of one language is very beneficial. Moreover, they told you in the first argument, telling that we are neglecting the identity and culture of the language. First of all, we say that this is not true. Why was language made from the beginning, Mr. Madam Speaker? We told you when our first speaker has clearly proved you that this itself was to spread the culture. This itself was to have a communications so that we can change their ideas, we can change and know other people's ideology from the beginning. We tell you that this is the main reason why language was made from the beginning. We tell you that when this is the case, when we have one language, we want to emphasize that this itself means that we have more interactions with other people, which also means that we can spread our cultures beneficially. We see that this is the fact, Madam Speaker, but moreover, culture is not only related to the language from the beginning. We say culture itself also includes like how we live, how we act, the decision that we make, or other ideology and perceptions that we have, right? This is the main reason why, even though language is one, this does not mean that everyone think in one way, everyone have one perception. This is not true, Mr. Madam Speaker. This is not the case. But moreover, even if it is right, even if that diversity is so important, we say that unnecessary conflict, having this kind of like conflict, severe extreme conflicts, as we told you in a sectarian device or whatnot, which was having no response coming from the previous speaker, we say that this is more important. Solving this problem is more important than diverse culture from the beginning. Just because language disappears does not mean that how I eat, what place I live does disappear. We say that this is a whole assumption coming from the opposition team's case. And their second argument was about hard to understand how the different accent leads to inefficiency or whatnot. First of all, we say that this is not true. We say that if under their logic, under their characterization of their logic, it also happens in their role, right? We say that where our diverse language beginning, it means that this kind of harms that they told you increases and maximizes in their role. We say that this is not the case, and if you want to solve the problem in your side, you have to provide how your alternative can ever solve this kind of like every accent difference in your case. Moreover, Madam Speaker, when we emphasize about this about the problems that we told you about conflict between the nations and the monopolization of the language, no response coming from the previous speaker. Why is this important? We tell you that monopolization itself means monopolization of certain languages such as English, Chinese, or whatnot that we have to understand. This itself leads to this kind of disappearance of the minor language such as like the language of tribe, like African tribe or whatnot. But before going on, yes.
If you're worried about these languages in small countries disappearing, why are you trying to actually make one language at the first place?
We say that disappearance itself is because of the monopolization. But when we have one language itself, when you're in your side, when this language disappears, it also means that your culture and everything disappears. But when we have one language itself, it also means that we can preserve our language with that, their culture with that language from the beginning. We can actually protect the cultures of the minor tribes or whatnot. We say that we are actually having better protections of these people. Moving to my next speech, we say that when this is the case, when they're having no response, we say that this monopolization is one of the most important aspects that we were having from this debate. I want a clarification from the next speaker. Let me rebut to the alternative that they told you, which was about translator from the beginning. Translator itself, first of all, translation and other alternative that they tell you is not accessible to everyone. We say that this kind of poor people or people in other countries themselves, they don't have translator from the beginning. It means that they're isolated in their society, right? But moreover, it also means that in the translator, there should be every language existing in our world, right? We see that this is not the case. Most of the language in that translator is the major language that is existing in the society. This is the main reason why in their society, this kind of like minor language in itself is isolated and neglected. Let's move on to our third argument, why it leads to a better society in our model. We say that there is barrier within the nation existing because of different languages our first speaker has clearly proved to you. People think that you and I are different if you and I are living in a different nation. We see that this is the problem. Individuals themselves think that they are different from people from other nations, and this leads to a concept that their culture is better than other nations' culture. People think that Korea's culture is better than other nations' culture. We say that this is not true. As the previous speaker has mentioned, that every culture should be respected. We say that when people think that our culture is better than other culture and over status, we say that this is the main problem that we have to solve. But when we have one language and people think that our culture itself is having a same status from the beginning, we say that every people will think my culture is important, but your culture is also important. We say that this is society that we want. We're respecting other cultures, and having more interactions and more ideas from the beginning. This is why I'm more than proud to propose. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to call upon the next speaker to present your opposition.
What is the team proposition team telling you hold throughout the debate? They're opposing to the value of diversity, right? And Mr. and Mrs. Speakers, we clearly tell you by having diversity, we have clear benefits coming from having diversity in the very first place, and we're going to prove to you how. So before moving on and conceding to our last argumentation, we want to go on rebut to the point made by the team proposition, right? And they talked about how communication will be more available throughout between these people, right? We first of all tell you that's not exclusive benefit coming from their side, because Mr. and Mrs. Speakers, even when we take a look in the status quo, is there any case, Mr. and Mrs. Speakers, if we can provide any cases that you can think of when these people don't know their another country's language, and so they cannot trade or have political events happen. We believe that's not the case, and we believe not knowing each other's language, and these politicians don't know any other country's language and not able to trade and stuff will not happen, and it's not happening in the status quo clearly as we can see, Mr. and Mrs. Speakers. And we also tell you Mr. and Mrs. Speakers, we also tell you when we Mr. Speakers, we also tell you when we set an even case, let's say in their own best case of scenario, let's say these kind of scenarios are happening individual versus individual, not politicians versus politicians, right? How many do you think there are cases these people as citizens, not politicians, have to communicate with people from other countries to another country when they're living in continents from continents? How many cases that you think all the way from India has to communicate with America or whatnot? We believe that's not the case, and they talked about how translator and isolated cases these are the problems. These are the problems because translator itself doesn't exist in the first place. We tell you, Mr. and Mrs. Speakers, when these countries are so isolated in the first place, translators are not needed, Mr. and Mrs. Speakers, because they don't even have to communicate with people living in all the way from America, all the way to South Korea in the first place to actually communicate with people in the other continents in the first place. So number three, we also tell you these people who inevitably have to communicate with people living in another continent. They can learn these process, and we believe those learning process is beneficial because it provides incentive. It
horizon opportunity, as we have clearly elaborated onto you about like their like another person's like culture and stuff. Like they also talked about monopolization, Mr. and Mrs. Speakers. But Mr. and Mrs. Speakers, we first of all tell you, Mr. and Mrs. Speakers, just because America is like a main English is like a main language that we use in the status quo, it doesn't mean that Korea is gonna like suddenly disappear. We believe this makes nonsense at the end of the day. And number two, let's talk about like isolated countries like islands that we cannot even name them because we don't know, Mr. and Mrs. Speakers, in the first place. Like when like these islands, these like isolated countries don't even have like outside exposure in the first place, how do you think like these like when they don't even know English, like how do you think like monopolization was actually occur and like these countries will actually like suddenly disappear? We believe that's not the case. And they talked about how like language is the matter and like language is the matter, but like number one, we also tell you like language is the source and language is the factor that like culture is like mostly melted in, because like they're words created from like history, they're words created from like culture, and they're like unique and simple words that are like created from like the back to the history, right? And like and number two, we also tell you by like actually like learning these like languages, we actually like believe that like you can have like an easy exposure to an easy opportunity to actually like gain opportunity to actually like take a look at what that culture is about. And having that clear, we would like to go on and move on to our next argumentation about how they will lose out the possibility of people to actually develop and improve and study. Like so in the status quo, Mr. and Mrs. Speakers, what do we see people? What's actually happening in the status quo? They learn, Mr. and Mrs. Speakers. They go through intercourse such as elementary all the way to college, even though they graduated from college, Mr. and Mrs. Speakers, in the first place, and they're not being graded by their like professors and teachers. They take TOEFL, they take like TOEICs, and like etc. These tests voluntarily, Mr. and Mrs. Speakers, and we think that is a clear benefit coming from the status quo, because Mr. and Mrs. Speakers, because like math and history or science, often people like think of these like subjects as like the ones you're already done with and you don't have to take care about it after you graduate. But in the case of language, we can clearly see that first of all, because language is an important factor, like when they go to when they go out to the society and when they're trying to get jobs, they actually have an incentive to learn these like language, and they actually have an incentive to actually study even after they graduate from college, right? And since like these like language have like immediate effect, immediate rewards and compensation of like higher possibilities of getting jobs and stuff, we believe that that is a clear benefit coming from this status quo, right? And number two, we believe that not only they learn it for like getting jobs and like stuff like that, they also learn it from hobbies, Mr. and Mrs. Speakers. For example, we can clearly see that like many people, actually many of them, like learn like Japanese just for fun, just for a hobby, instead of like playing games on like their time to spare. They actually learn these like other languages. And Mr. and Mrs. Speakers, we also tell you this is like the easiest to learn culture in the first place, as we are keep emphasizing up to. We believe that this incentivizes people to actually learn even after they graduate, Mr. and Mrs. Speakers. And why is this good? Mr. and Mrs. Speakers, we believe we value education. We value people actually trying to learn voluntarily, because Mr. and Mrs. Speakers, we believe those like learning process and those learning of the people voluntarily actually helps the development, actually helps the improvement, and actually like as a group, as a society, and as a citizen, Mr. and Mrs. Speakers, at the end of the day, they help these like people to stay awake at the end of the day by keep trying to be educated at the end of the day, right, Mr. and Mrs. Speakers? Thus, we are very proud to oppose. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. Now I'd like to call upon the next speaker, Governor Whip.
So, Mr. Madam Speaker, in my two classes, I'll have to prove to you why language itself exists in the first place, In my second clash, I would like to prove to you who has more benefits towards the society, who creates more benefits, and who creates a better society to live in from the first place. So let's directly move into the first place without further ado. First clash, why do language exist in the first place? So both teams acknowledge the fact that language itself existed from the first place for communications, for diversities of ideas, to actually have communications and interactions between you and me. When that is the case, who is society who is able to achieve the purpose of language from the first place? We believe it is the government who has done that purpose from the first place. Why is this? Because in the current society, the current world itself is an echo chamber, Mr. Madam Speaker. Why is that? Because the ideologies, the perceptions, the ways that people talk, the ways that people think, the ways that people actually see the world itself is very, very different from culture to culture, from world to world, from like country to country. When we see these Arabian people, are we able to understand why they actually do these kind of religious things? Or when we see these people in Yemen, are we able to actually understand why they treat women like trash, or why they treat women like tools? No, we do not. I'm not saying that we should always understand, we should always empathize why they do these things. It is the thing that we want to say is that because of those cultural differences and because of lack of communications, we don't want conflicts happening from the first place. We don't want things like sectarian divides from happening from the first place. We see many people dying from sectarian divides. We see many people dying in African countries because of lack of communications between each other. That is why we want to do this. That is why we are the ones who's actually saving more lives from the first place. Second, they say translation itself exists, so this policy itself is unnecessary. Mr. Madam Speaker, thank you. As our second speaker has already clearly mentioned, the existence of translation itself, the very fact that operation itself today is saying and emphasizing that translations and translating these gadgets exist is the very fact that for language to exist, and the purpose of language is for communications, and our policy and our team is able to actually fulfill the role of language and the purpose that they want to achieve with those translations people and with those translations machines. Second of all, we believe people who translate, they can't send the exact wording and the meaning of what they say towards the other person. Why is that? Thankfully, they say that language itself is very different from each other. And language itself is very hard to translate and actually to send the direct meaning towards the other person. When we see United States and South Korea, is it really easy to actually translate English that we're speaking right now to Korean? No, it's not. It's really different. And it's difficult to actually translate the exact meaning of what we meant in the United States to what we exactly meant in South Korea. Especially South Korea, there are many examples and there are many ways that we interpret what people say, and we believe that the understanding of each other itself is very different of language. When that is the case, we believe under our side, when this is assuming the feasibility to actually make all languages itself very equal, we believe the one who actually is able to fulfill the purpose of language itself is the government side. So we take the first clash, why language exists. Second clash, the comparison between the benefits and harms that came out in today's debate. First of all, we believe our team had clear harm that exists about monopolizations of language exists. However, the very fact they say TOEIC, TOEFL exists, and the process of learning these languages itself is very valuable and very important. First of all, the very fact that we need TOEIC, that we need TOEFL in order to go into university itself is a monopolization of language. Why are we speaking English right now in today's debate? Why are we speaking English, and why do we have to learn English in order to go into good universities? And in the status quo, why are we expanding our education to Chinese? It is because the monopolization, the influence of one country itself is directly linked with your language, and is directly linked with what kind of language other people say. Because most of the people in the entire world use English, and because China has so many people in that one country, and because the influence of language itself is very different, that is why we learn the TOEIC, that is why we will learn TOEFL, that is why we feel proud when we get 120 in TOEFL tests. When that is the case, we believe the monopolization itself exists. This proves that monopolization exists under our side, and under their side, that is why we want to pass this policy. Also, they say learning English, learning language, learning other different types of language is very important and very valuable. First of all, Mr. Madam Speaker, let's ask them a question. Do we actually learn Arabic? Do we actually learn minor languages, minor states languages? No, we do not. What do we learn? We learn English. We learn Chinese. Very few people actually try to learn even Japanese. Why is that? Because the amount of influence is different, the amount of benefits that you get from learning that language is very different from the first place. When that is the case, why are they saying the value of learning that language itself is very important when first, they didn't explain what kind of benefits exist, second, when monopolization exists and the benefits for learning certain languages all differ, then how are we able to achieve free market of ideas? How are we able to achieve communications between the minorities and the majorities in this current status quo? I want the next speaker to prove this, but even if she does, we believe it is way too late. Also, they say something like, isolated countries, we don't have to learn interactions because we don't have many chances to interact with people, minorities, so we don't actually need to pass this policy. Very irresponsible opposition today in today's debate. First of all, their entire first speaker comes to the podium and says, diversity of culture is very important. We should actually protect every culture's diversity. And the second speaker comes to the podium and says, because we don't have interaction, we don't need communication. Very irresponsible. We believe that is the tension itself in their own case. And second of all, we believe the translations, for the protections and culture itself, we believe our policy is very important. We see examples of people, Indians actually trying to desperately spread their language towards other American students because they want to keep their culture. Language itself is a basis to keep their culture and protect their culture and spread their cultures to other people. When that is the case, who is able to achieve a better society with diverse cultures? We believe it is the government, and we're proud to propose. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Now let's call upon the next speaker, Dr. Schubert.
Can I start? Mr. Speaker, we tell you this debate is not about efficiency. We tell you this debate is about which team actually protects the identity, protects the history, protects the culture of these countries at the end of the day, right? We proved the government team had to prove to us today why one language is so important. When first they're going to actually destroy all the identity of that country itself, and second, when we told you that we have alternatives at the first place that can perfectly solve all the problems that they told us right now. And Mr. Speaker, because in our previous speakers we proved to you why identity is so important, because we proved to you why culture will not be actually diverse in their case, this is why we win this debate today. So as the opposition, we would like to tell you why we win this debate in two aspects. First of all, why all the problems in their case that they told us will not happen. And second of all, why language is so important and why language is so diversely deeply connected into a culture at the first place. About the conflicts, Mr. Speaker, they told us how there aren't lots of interaction and people are not actually able to express their ideas to people who speak all their different languages, right? Mr. Speaker, we tell you, first of all, the conclusion and the consequences of discourse actually differ from the interaction, the intention of that discourse at the first place, right? Mr. Speaker, we tell you the conflicts will always happen in their case. Why? Because if the intention of the discourse at the first place is is to share ideas, if it's a logical discourse, if it's a rational discourse at the first place, even though people have different languages, we tell you that people will actually do their best to actually use alternatives, use translators to actually share ideas and make logical and rational discourse at the first place. However, Mr. Speaker, if the intention at the first place is to insult one another, Mr. Speaker, we tell you, even though people have one language, this is when these conflicts actually happen in their case also, right? Mr. Speaker, this is why we tell you that conflicts will not be actually solved in their case also. Mr. Speaker, they also told us about the conflicts that come from culture differences, right? They gave us an example of Yemenis. Mr. Speaker, the government team cannot solve these problems of culture differences and the conflicts that come from them unless they cram all the cultures that we have in the status quo into one culture, right? Mr. Speaker, they told us that they're going to make one culture because they said that by having one language, the conflicts that come from all cultural differences will not happen. This is why the government actually is not able to protect the culture, and this is why they're going to make one culture at the end of the day. Also, Mr. Speaker, about the monopolization of some languages, right? Mr. Speaker, first of all, we tell you that these monopolizations change throughout time, right? Because the reason why we learned English in lots of different countries at the first place because US was the most powerful country in the international society, right? Mr. Speaker, the most powerful country actually changes. This is why, because the China is now actually more powerful than the US, because China is actually acting as a powerful actor in the international society now, this is why people now learn Chinese instead of English, right? Mr. Speaker, these small populations actually change, right? And also, Mr. Speaker, they told us how they're worried about these languages of small countries actually disappearing, right? If they really care about these languages actually disappearing of small countries, they're the worst actors, and they're the actors that actually do that. Why? Because they're going to make one language, and they're going to destroy all language that we have in the status quo. Mr. Speaker, this is why we tell you that they are the most irresponsible actors in the right now. And also, Mr. Speaker, about the alternative that we told you about the translator, we told you these people in isolated places actually do not actually need translators at the first place. They also told us how translators in the status quo cannot translate languages perfectly, right? Mr. Speaker, we tell you that time will actually solve this problem at the first place. We see we see development of translators right now. We see Papago and AI actually making these translators better, right? Mr. Speaker, even though these changes will be so, we tell you that these translators will one day be perfect, right? Mr. Speaker, even though these changes are slow, because we actually protect the identity and the culture of all of these countries, this is why we have a moral high ground at the end of the day. Second of all, about the importance of language. Mr. Speaker, in our team, we consider language as treasures, right? Mr. Speaker, they told us there are lots of other aspects that actually form culture. They told us culture is about how we live, how we act. It's all about the perception we have in the society, right? Mr. Speaker, we tell you language is exclusive. Why? Because language is a way to express all these kind of things. It's a way to actually share and express how we live, how we act, and the social perception, right? Mr. Speaker, this is why language is actually exclusive. Mr. Speaker, I know it's have 3,000 different languages, 3,000 different words to actually describe snow, right? Mr. Speaker, this shows you that language is actually directly linked into culture, right? It's about the history. Because language has changed throughout the history, throughout the time inside the country. This is why I consider language is the most important thing at the first place. Mr. Speaker, about the third argument, how they said because the culture is different in the status quo, people think that their culture of their country is more superior, right? And they told us if we have only one language, people will actually consider all cultures as same at the first place. As a conclusion, Mr. Speaker, first thing that they didn't do about how, Mr. Speaker, they didn't have a direct linkage on how one language will actually lead to people thinking that all cultures are the same. And also, Mr. Speaker, by this they conceded to the fact that culture is directly linked to languages, right? Mr. Speaker, they told us that culture is actually really important and it's directly linked to languages at the first place. And what they're saying today is that they're going to destroy all these cultures by having only one language at the end of the day. Mr. Speaker, this is why we tell you that the government team today is really responsible. Also, Mr. Speaker, because we proved to you that language is your identity, because it's a part of who you are at the end of the day, this is why we have to protect the identity, protect the language at the end of the day, right? Mr. Speaker, because we proved to you the conflicts and the problems that the government told you will always happen in also their case. This is why we take this statement. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Now I'd like to finish up the opposition side by calling upon the opposition reply.
Speaker, we clearly told you that language changed throughout the history, throughout the time, right? It has changed so that people can pronounce it better, we can use easily, Mr. Madam Speaker. And the language that is used in the status quo is language used by countries in the status quo is the best language because it got feedback from the culture or history and because it changed throughout the history, Mr. Madam Speaker. However, in their case, we think that it can never happen in their scenario, Mr. Madam Speaker. Before moving on to our two issues, we're going to clarify a few points. Firstly, we think that the government team have to prove us how their policy is so efficient, how it is so worthy to destroy culture and history and identity of countries, even though there are alternatives in the status quo. But I think that they never proved to us throughout this whole debate, I think that this is the reason why they lose at the end of the day. And the second point to clarify, I think that's as the P prime. As the government team said, they talked about how some culture is better, and the kind of like mindset is being opted in if we go for this motion, right? But we think that as our team's second speaker and third speaker have clearly mentioned, firstly we cannot judge which language is better, right? When language does not have superiority over one another, we think even if they're called policy, we think that their point about one culture is being better is unjustified, and the strength of the country differs, right? And strong countries such as America and China will dominate anyway, even under their policy. And secondly, about the contradiction, because their first stance was about language and culture are different, but their second stance was about difference in language and will lead to superiority of culture, which proved to you that they themselves said amidst language and culture are relevant, Mr. Among Speaker. Moving on to the last point about moving on to the main issue about why which side can actually protect better culture, right? We clearly told you from the first place that what should be important when you interact between people, right? We think that language is the most important factor, and respect their identity, understanding their diversities is important. We clearly told you from the first place that language is the only way to represent my identity, my own country, my religion, my ideas, and my thoughts. And because these factors are important by countries, we told you that language is special, language itself is special and unique. Not only that, we clearly told you how language is base of culture. It's just the only path forward to actually portray my idea and to show my opinions and to share ideas for society. Because of culture, social atmosphere, and environment varies countries by countries, we clearly told you that language which is used to represent that culture, it can't be actually one line language, because it cannot actually represent my own culture and my own identity, Mr. Among Speaker. So therefore, I'm proud to oppose and vote for the opposition. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now let's call upon final speaker, government reply.
Mr. Speaker, in today's room, if we're using English, under the opposition team's logic, if we're using English, we're not Korean. We think that that's not the logic in today's debate, right? Just because we use another language doesn't mean my identity suddenly disappears. Doesn't mean what I eat, where I live, what my country is, my culture is, doesn't disappear just because I change language. Just because I use English doesn't mean I'm not going to eat bibimbap anymore. Doesn't mean I'm not a Korean anymore. That's why we think that their logic in today's debate is truly false. So first of all, we think that language is that everyone uses in society, and when they talk about the accent or whatnot, and that is the problem, that is not the enough reason for you to say that we should not have any one language in our society. But moreover, we think that now what language we speak also has an accent, so their problem also exists under their case. What are they doing to solve the problem, right? First of all, you tell us that diversity is important right now, and that we are actually neglecting the identity and we're not protecting the culture. First, Mr. Speaker, you have a opposition team that goes for diversity. You have a government team that actually goes to solve these kind of unnecessary problems, unnecessary conflicts from happening when we have one language. We already told you that we are going to be able to solve unnecessary conflicts when two different languages meet. We already told you example of sectarian divide, no response coming from the opposition team. As their example, Mr. Madam Speaker, in our society, when politicians meet, they have to take place. They have to meet those people, they have to use these translators, they have to use people that translate them from these kind of other countries. That itself is inconvenient, Mr. Madam Speaker. That itself is the example that we want to change by using one language. We can also easily communicate with other individuals, politicians, but other individuals. The only response coming from this point is that they say that these other individuals, not politicians, doesn't communicate much already in the society. Mr. Speaker, just because of this idea that individuals do not communicate with other different countries does not give enough justification for us to stop these kind of unnecessary conflicts that happens in the society, to stop this heart of monopolization of these countries, of these kind of English or whatnot. But when they tell us the monopolization changes, then are you saying the monopolization itself is good because it changes in the first place? We already told you the concept of monopolization itself is bad. The concept itself that English is going to be more famous in our country, that TOEIC or TOEFL is used more in order for you to get a job itself is bad right now in the society, and that is what we want to change. No response coming from the opposition team. Therefore, we already told you that we're not neglecting the identity of these individuals. We're not making them to change their own culture. We're just having this kind of one language. Just because you use Chinese, just because you use English doesn't necessarily mean that you're not a Korean anymore. But then second of all, about the point of translator, first of all, we already told you numerous times that this itself, the concept of translator itself, shows that the society, that the problem right now is very complicated, and therefore we see a great necessity to use those kinds of one language in our society in order to make unnecessary conflicts happen. But second of all, we told you in our first speaker that translator is not good right now in our society because it's not talking with individual to person. It's using a machine in order to understand that process. It's very inconvenient for you to do that when the government already has the technology already, when they're assuming this kind of technology, and when we have those kind of chances to use only one language and stop all of those harms, we think that the government has a full responsibility to take those kind of things. Therefore, we think that the opposition actually thinks that culture is the same as language, Mr. Speaker, and they tell us that when we have no language, there is no culture. And we already told you that language is a part of culture. Just because you lose another language doesn't mean you change your own culture. We think that it's obvious that we win to these debates, and therefore we are very proud to propose.
Thank you very much. This concludes the debate. I invite the debaters to cross the floor, shake hands. Congratulations again for advancing so far. We would be announcing the result at the closing ceremony in the main hall. So please pack up and leave. Thank you very much again.